The people have been arrested and at least £100 million worth of damage has been caused as violence has torn across the country. It came after a 17-year-old boy of Algerian descent was shot dead by a police officer last week. It is worthwhile noting as well that I did have a guest on last week who said to me anyway that he understood that the ethnicity of the police officer who did the shooting was not indeed white, so I think that might be a point of relevance, but there we go. It got me thinking about similar problems in many European countries and led me to ask the question whether or not multiculturalism has failed. I'm joined now by counter-terrorism and societal experts. It's Wasiq Wasiq. Wasiq, thank you very much. Great to have you on the show. A lot of people were talking to me over the weekend about this. What's going on in France? Could something like that really happen here? Is this a visible sign of multiculturalism failing?
Well, I think it certainly has the hallmarks of something like multiculturalism failing. The fact that a 17-year-old of Algerian descent was killed presumably by someone who's also not ethnically French certainly gives the impression that actually what's taken place as a result of that seems to suggest that those who are rioting are not actually happy with everything that's being given to them in France. So the freedom to believe and to practice their religion in a way that perhaps other religions aren't able to practice in Muslim majority countries. So yes, there is certainly an argument to be made that multiculturalism is failing.
Now, what we are looking at there in France is clearly not a particularly well-integrated society. And France has a huge Muslim diaspora, a huge Muslim population, as well as African, etc., etc., etc. And if it takes the... And by the way, you know, clearly, I think, unlawful, it would appear, killing of a 17-year-old boy. I'm not trying to diminish that. But if it takes that... If the reaction to that is to cause £100 million worth of damage and set everything on fire and try to kill the mayor of a particular city in all of this, that to me indicates that there is a lot of seething, bubbling resentment and lawlessness just below the surface. That does not scream integration to me.
No, it doesn't. And I don't think it's just a case that there's things that are bubbling underneath the surface. We have to really put things into perspective. Some of these people who are rioting are not rioting for a just cause. What they not that there is any justification to riot, but they're looting retail stores. Now, I'm not sure how that's going to help this 17-year-old who has been killed, what seemingly appears to be an unlawful killing. So I don't buy the idea that some of these or most of these rioters are actually acting in a just way.
No, not at all. I mean, how many pairs of new trainers do you have to steal before you feel as though you've got justice for the 17-year-old lad who was shot? I mean, the two things are completely separate, aren't they, as far as I'm concerned? I've got to ask you the question, though, do you think that something like what we're seeing in France could happen here?
I'd be wary. I'd be very cautious to say anything in that sense. I think Britain is one of the best countries for ethnic minorities, for immigrants. We have a really good track record in terms of our educational outcomes of those who are of immigrant communities. We have to see how we've contributed towards society. And even when we do have instances where, communities or minority communities have actually, broken the law, it's been nipped in the bud very quickly, and that's something that we can be proud of in comparison to some of our European counterparts.
Well, exactly, and you mention our European counterparts there. Is there anywhere in Europe that you think that has really got multiculturalism right? Because I'm looking at quite prolific examples in places like Germany. I'm looking at places like Sweden. We're looking at France. I mean, has it actually really worked anywhere?
I'm not sure that we can give a binary answer to that, yes or no. I think there are some instances where, there have been successes, and there's also been instances where there's been failures. And in the case of this it has been a failure with the French riots. But then we have to put this into a broader context. We've seen rioting taking place over a number of years with a lot of union workers who haven't been getting the pay that they deserve. So there is a really interesting point to be made in terms of multiculturalism. But I think when we look at Britain, we are really the model to be looked up to.
Yeah, just full disclosure as well, I am covering for Nigel Farage later, and we're doing quite a lot on this, and I've got a couple of guests on it as well, and I went out and about earlier on. I went to the Edgware Road in London, which is conveniently just around the corner, but also quite a good example, really, of an area with, a high influx of people from predominantly around the Middle East and countries like that, and just wanted to get their views, really, on whether or not they felt well integrated, whether or not they felt multiculturalism was a good thing for Britain. A fascinating insight, actually, a good range of views in it. So I'll be showing that a little bit later on. One of the concerns that some people raised for me was how do I phrase this? Maybe the importation of some kind of foreign drama. So let's just say that there is an issue that kicks off between, I'm just making this up, but, the Egyptian government and the Lebanese government, right? And then that then plays out on the streets of Britain between two communities who happen to live and operate near each other here. And I'm not convinced that the vast majority of Brits would want that. I mean, is there not a risk of that? We're not seeing that in some situations in places like Leicester, examples a bit like that.
I think, yes, of course, any immigrant community is not going to completely sever their ties to their country of origin. It would be ridiculous to assume that. And where there are importation of politics from abroad and it being played out on British soil needs to be obviously tackled. But that's not to say that it doesn't happen. It can happen. We saw that happen in Leicester, where whatever's happening in countries across the Indian subcontinent is now being played out here, and minority communities are being targeted because of what's happening in foreign lands. And there's always going to be that case. But the fact is, when people do come to this country, they do integrate. We do have our British values of the rule of law, freedom of speech, freedom of belief, democracy, and these still function, and they are continuing to function. And that's one of the hallmarks to show that actually we are doing a lot better than some of these other countries.
Yeah, and that is what a lot of people said to me as well. They said they lived in other European countries, and this was by far and away the best. Wasiq, thank you very much. Wasiq Wasiq there, who is a counter-terrorism expert, also a social commentator